Another week, another Ex-Homeschoolers Club. I am your host, Jacob Gooden, and we are back to get to talk about the good, the bad, and the ugly of homeschooling. I'm so stoked today. I have a brand new friend, Whitney, who is joining us. She reached out to me via, I don't remember if it was social media or email or something, maybe YouTube, but to talk about the show, and we just connected, and I was like, I gotta have you on the show. So, Whitney, first and foremost, welcome to the Ex-Homeschoolers Club.
Thank you, Jacob. I'm really glad to be here.
Let's just dive right in. Let's share with the audience a little bit about your homeschool experience. Kind of set the scene a little bit for us. Like, what was family life like? How many siblings? Were all of you guys homeschooled? Roughly, like, when were you homeschooled? That kind of thing. Give us a little bit of a snapshot of what things look
Sure.
like.
I feel like my experience is maybe a little unique. I was born in the 80s, and my brothers and I'm the oldest. I have two younger brothers. And my mom was an educator. So she had a bachelor's and then a master's in education. So was a teacher by profession. And she decided to homeschool all of us. But we did have a little bit of I guess, a strange trajectory maybe. So I'm 7 years older than my youngest brother, and so I started first and then my middle brother next, and then by the time I got to 7th grade, my mom decided to put us back into school. Partially, she had some health issues, and so I went back into school part day in 7th grade and then back into public school full time starting in 8th grade through high school. So my middle brother went back into school in 5th grade would have been, and then my youngest brother was so much younger that he essentially wasn't homeschooled. He only really had like maybe a year of homeschool. So the three of us have sort of very different experiences and very different
Right.
memories of everything.
Yeah.
So just it was a sort of a unique thing, and then I think when we spoke before, I'd mentioned to you that my mom also did a kind of a strange thing where she put us into school for like a month or two at a time randomly, and so we ended up like even through elementary school, we'd go into school for like a month or two at a time randomly.
I'm sure that played like such a weird role too in just like socialization too, because you're like, you go from like, not that homeschoolers have no friends, but they tend to be a little bit more on the, we're a little bit more antisocial to like all of a sudden I'm in a classroom with a bunch of kids who know each other, who maybe
Mhm.
have been going to school with each other for a number of years at this point, and then like a few months later you're like pulled right back out. So it's like that's also got to be kind of this weird ping pong back and forth effect as well.
Oh, it really was, and I will say too that she never put us in the same school twice, so it was like there was 5 different elementary schools, I think, in my hometown, and so we ended up at different points in each of the elementary schools, and so
Oh my
it was
gosh.
I'm not really sure, like, unfortunately, my mom has passed, so I can't ask her why, and my dad doesn't remember, and so it's just yeah, it was weird. Not gonna lie, it
Yeah.
was a strange experience, and as a result, I did have friends, but it wasn't like a core group of friends when I was young.
Okay, so your mom was an educator. So when it
Mhm.
comes to school at home, did she have a pretty good like structure to what she was doing since she had that training of like, okay, hey, we're gonna go through this curriculum and set the days up like this, or was it just kind of a free for all?
It was more of a free for all, except for math. So math we had, we did Saxon, and I think we touched on this before. It was I don't know where the Saxon Math comes from exactly, but it seems to be a common curriculum that was used by homeschoolers. So we did Saxon Math, and then aside from that, we didn't have any curriculum set for any of the other subjects. Um, and so my mom was really into like, I guess having us learn through doing things. So, for example, I'm a musician, and that was a big part of my childhood was having me play music. My brothers, to a lesser extent, and then we did a lot of things like knitting. Like we did art classes. So we do classes and things with other people, but it was like an hour or two a week, that kind of thing.
Right.
So it was more
Okay.
experiential, I guess, except for math. Yeah.
Okay.
Which is
Yeah.
I don't know, and she didn't teach us math, it was more like, "Here's a math book and learn it."
Right.
So
Right. Yeah. Which sometimes doesn't work so well when you're like a little kid. Like, I
Yeah.
definitely by the time you're in high school, it's a little bit you can kinda, "Okay, here's a textbook, it walks me through everything," and then, I would go to my mom for, like, tutoring, or my mom was not the math person, so my dad was the tutor for math. But,
Yeah.
whatever subject it was, just kind of go to parents for more of a tutoring approach as opposed to them being like, "I'm not gonna give you a lecture at home," like, that doesn't
Right.
make a whole lot of sense, just read the
Right.
textbook. But yeah, I can imagine as a kid, that would be kinda tricky, and, yeah, Saxon is kind of one of those. I feel like Saxon curriculum and a Becca curriculum are the 2 that
Yeah, I've heard
most
of
come up for a
Becca.
lot of people,
Yeah. We
and
never used
I
that one for whatever
recently
reason, but yeah.
yeah, I recently chatted with my mom because I did a Becca for the first couple years, and her reasoning behind it was the fact that it's structured to be in a classroom already, and so it's kind of this.
Ah,
If you
okay.
don't know what you're doing, it's kind of this easy, just like plug and play type of situation. However, homeschool kids are usually homeschooled for a reason, and it tends to be
Mhm.
we're a little bit different than most people.
Mhm.
Our education style is different, and so kind of recreating that school experience at home doesn't always work for everybody, me included. So it was just kind of
Sure.
like it never fit right with my family. So she quickly transitioned out of that, and by the time I was graduating, it was just this crazy mismatch of everything that worked together, right? So we had this math, which was like math UC, and then we had this English company over here, and we had this over here. And so it was kind
Okay.
of this mix mash of a lot of different things. Not everybody, Saxon and Abeka can work for some people, but
Yeah.
it didn't work for us.
Yeah. And I think, like, for me, it worked okay because I liked math and I sort of thought of it as like a puzzle.
Mhm.
But my
Yeah,
brother didn't work for him as well. So he and
yeah,
I, had slightly different experiences. I think he needed maybe more one-on-one attention than he got, and then for me, for whatever reason, I was able to do a little bit more by myself. Um,
yeah,
but I think, like, it showed when we got back into school. Like, I was fine. I was at the grade level I should have been. Um, but my brother was struggling quite a bit more, and he continued to struggle. He's fine now, but it was definitely like there was a difference when we went back to
yeah.
school.
So you also talked about like experiential learning. You brought up like knitting and other things like
Yeah.
that. Were they like are we talking mostly like home ec type of stuff, or like are we also talking about like,
Oh, good
oh,
question.
we go over with these
Yeah.
friends and like do like a science experiment or like things like that?
A lot of it was home ec centered. Uh, and I mean, to my mom's credit, we all did it. So, like, my brothers both had to go to knitting class too. Um, but it was more like it was definitely more artsy focused, I would say. My mom was pretty into the arts.
Yeah.
And then on the science side of things, it was more I actually don't feel like we had any like formal science education. We would have books and things that we could read. But we didn't have like a science or science things that we did together. She was really into like history, so we did a lot of like visiting museums, and we did a lot of uh going and visiting like for example, I'm trying to think of some like national parks and things like that. So we did a lot of like
Right.
history related but not so much on the science thing, which is ironic now because I am a scientist.
Yeah. No, I think that's interesting because I feel like it's one of two things. I interviewed someone on the show who they really had very little education as a kid. Their
Yeah.
mom was not a great educator. And what was interesting was but the way they found their passion was they like the thing that they were interested in, they didn't really get to do as much as a kid. And so then
Oh,
when they
interesting.
actually like got to a point where they're like, "Oh, I can like make this decision." They're like, "I'm really into this." Or I'm like, you
Yeah.
know, and so they kind of were like, "Okay, like I'm going all in," and
Yeah.
then so I think it's interesting how people different, kind of find their passions. It's like I also was big in music. I played instruments and that kind of thing, and then I went to college to get a music business degree. So it's like, but my passion
Yeah.
was kind of all throughout my life. Um, so I don't know. It's kind of interesting to see when and how people kind of find that thing, that they're like, okay, this is it.
Yeah, so I mean, I thought I loved music as a kid, but then it turned out as I got older, when I was able to make more of a decision for myself about things, that it wasn't my passion necessarily. I think it was more my mom's passion, but it was like the focus of my childhood, to be frank. I started playing when I was 5, and that was like the thing that I did. I played violin, I was in orchestras, and all sorts of musical touring groups and things like this. It was the focus. And then when I got to college and was able to kind of make more of a decision about what I wanted to do, it turns out I really, really like being outside and playing in the
Yeah.
mud with plants. Yeah.
Is there a specific moment that you remember kind of being like, "Oh, I think science is the thing," or was it just kind of a gradual like realization of like,
Yeah.
"No, I'm really into this."
I think it was a gradual realization, but I did have a high school teacher that was very inspiring to me. She was my physics teacher, and I really, really felt like I connected well with her. And that was one of the first
Yeah.
times that I was like, oh man, I really like this. Like, I don't know
Yeah.
exactly what it is, but it's like cool. Like I am like talking about how things move and how they interact with the world, and like, oh my gosh, you can make things fly. It was one of those like sort of, oh wow. And she was awesome. She was a really great teacher, and she was a woman too. So I think for me that was kind of one of the first women I'd seen in my life that was a scientist or teaching science. And so I connected really well with her, and then it kind of sparked a trajectory. I actually thought I wanted to do engineering in college. And then I changed my mind, but I think that's kind of what set me most on the path towards being like, this is cool.
Yeah, and what area in particular, like, do you study in, like, the scientific realm? I know it's just, like,
Oh
a
yeah.
vast plethora of everything.
Yeah, so I'm in plant sciences. I work specifically in agriculture, but
Mhm.
I'm a plant scientist, so I get to go and do like, you know, look at plants, and I ID plants, but I work in ag. So in the context of ag. But I wasn't really
Okay.
into ecology in college. That's kind of what I was like, wow, people get paid to do this, to like hike around in the woods and like look at plants. I'm like, oh wow, this is so cool.
Yeah.
So that yeah, college was when I really solidified like, oh wow, this is amazing.
I tell people all the time 'cause, being a podcast editor, I'm like, "People pay me to learn stuff every single day," and I love that.
Yeah.
And so, like, I work on a vast different variety of shows from business to dating to relationships to now interviewing ex-homeschoolers and, like, all yeah, everything you can
Yeah.
imagine in between, right? Like, therapy and all that kind of stuff. And it's so funny because I sometimes I feel like I'm just robbing people because I'm like, "You're literally paying me to learn something that I would just do in my own free time."
Yeah.
Um, and granted, I'm actually editing their stuff, but it's it's funny. It's so refreshing, I think, when you can kind of find something that you're like, "Whoa, like someone will pay me to do this thing." That's like the
100%.
craziest, I think, feeling.
I agree. I agree. Yeah, and I will say, like, for my current career, like, I do think homeschooling in the way that my mom did it actually maybe did help because, as a scientist, my job is to kind of learn on my own, right? There's no guide,
Right.
right? I have to figure things out and try things by myself. So I think that experience as a kid of like not having a super directed like learning
Yeah.
environment actually did kind of help for my current career.
So when you transitioned into like junior high and high school for into public school, the difference there, I'm wondering because I mean that I don't know, but
Yeah.
like, is there a difference of like, are teachers kind of holding your hand a little bit more along the way to be like, okay, you have to do this reading and you have to get this done and that kind of a thing? Because the way like the way my school was set up was like my parents would sit down with me at the beginning of the week or whatever, and they would kind of be like, okay, hey, here's what you need to accomplish by the end of the week. We don't really care how
Mm.
you get there. It's
Mhm.
on you to get to this endpoint. But I would imagine high school is probably like public high school is probably not like that.
Yeah.
There's very much more of a regimented, like, okay, you're gonna sit in the seat for X amount of hours and we're gonna study this for a certain amount of time and that kind of a thing,
Yeah.
where it almost feels a little bit more like hand holding. But maybe I could be wrong. I don't know.
Your experience in homeschool is very different than mine because there was no structure like that even of like, "This is what you have to learn." It was just like, "Brr,
Right.
here's the day, just, like, figure it out." Um,
Yeah.
so it was like, I might read the whole day, and then the next day I might, do math the whole day, and then I might it was very I guess if it
Right.
I was yeah, I've heard parents that are more structured, and I guess yours was, but mine was not at all. So I was so far out in the other end of things. I actually really liked when I went to school and was like more clear, like, okay, this is what we're learning. And
Mhm.
here, this is, the assignment that you have, write this paper um, about this particular thing. So for me, but I did have like a really high perfectionist streak. So I academically, I felt this need to like always get really high grades, and it was very stressful for me. So,
Yeah.
and I don't think my brother felt the same way about it. But yeah, for me, I was like, I have to do the best, be the best. And so it was a little bit more anxiety inducing, I guess, than it probably had been in the past. I felt I had to earn the grades, I guess, if that makes
Yeah.
sense. Yeah.
Yeah. I think that's also just like, firstborn.
Yeah, that
We
could be.
kind of tend to, I'm also a firstborn kid. So I think and also we tend to be that kind of like, we got to please mom and dad.
Yeah.
We got to try our best, kind
Yes,
of a
that
thing.
probably
There's an
could be.
expectation. Yeah. And then the younger kids tend to like get it easier, even if they're tough on themselves to be like, oh, I'm going to be an A perfect student or whatever. But
Yeah.
You know, I think they sometimes catch a break that where we didn't feel like I don't know. There were certain things that my parents talking now to my parents, they go, "Yeah, we don't know why you held yourself to the standard because we would, tell you like, it's okay to get a B. It's okay to like do this
Yeah.
thing." And it's like, "No, no, 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 no. Like I have to be A plus student. I have to be this thing." And it's like, well, sometimes it's okay.
Yeah.
That's not everyone's parents experience, but
Yeah.
I get that I understand your feeling of, like, I gotta earn it. I gotta really, like, if I
Yeah.
don't get an A, the world collapses, you know?
Yeah, and I do think that from my mom, at least, there was that expectation that I do really well. I don't know, it's like my dad wasn't as involved, and so even to this day, like, when we talk about things that he doesn't remember things in the same way that I do, or he won't remember exactly, like, you know, how things went, or and so I don't feel like he was as involved, but my mom certainly had that expectation on me particularly. Yeah.
Yeah.
There was a bit of a
Yeah.
gender difference in how my mom treated us, and so there was a different expectation for me than for my brothers with a lot of things.
Yeah. Did you grow up in, like, in a religious household as well where that was also because I know sometimes religion also plays a role in that, like, that gender pushing that gender role stereotype, like, forward in a lot of cases.
Yeah, so there was definitely, like, I wouldn't say it was, cult-like or anything, but my mom was and again, this was coming primarily from my mom, but she was super into church and things when we were little, and
Mhm.
then it kinda persisted, like, I had, like, a um, purity ring. Like that was, but it was only me, not my brothers. I was only one. Um, and then like, there was an expectation that I wouldn't date or wouldn't, have a boyfriend or whatever until I was, I think, an adult. Um, so there was that, and it was very, very gender specific in that way. Yeah,
Yeah.
we did go to church. I went to vacation Bible school and stuff like that. It was primarily Baptist focused, which I don't think it was very like culty, but I guess I don't know. At the time, I do remember there was also like a lot of pressure, maybe publicly from like Christina Aguilera and Britney Spears. I remember a lot of like that purity culture talk was happening. Um, maybe they changed as I got older, but it was happening a lot when I was in like middle school, and from what I can remember.
I don't wanna say purity culture doesn't still exist. I almost feel like because I was that age in like the 2010s. I mean, I started high school in 2010. And so, but yeah, even a couple years before that, purity culture was very much still very real. Like I didn't
Yeah.
have a purity ring. I had friends who did. I don't know. I didn't have parents who pushed that on me. The purity stuff was pushed on me. I didn't date in high school, that kind of a
Okay.
thing. Um, It's interesting. I've been unpacking a lot more of it more recently,
Yeah.
and shout out to one of the listeners of the show, Mrs. Annie Slagboom. She sent me a book called "When Religion Hurts You,"
Okay.
and I've been actively listening to it, and it's been kind of breaking down these thoughts of like, because like you, I don't view my church experience in a very like cult like way.
Hmm.
I think mostly because when you think about a cult, you think about a lot of times like Jonestown, or you think about
Right, yeah.
Waco, Texas, right? You think about these like insane cults where it's like there's very strict rules. There's very like you go outside of it, you get
Yeah.
kicked off the scene, Scientology, that kind of
Mhm,
thing.
mhm.
And so I think we tend to go to those places and then ignore sometimes what could be argued as cult like behavior inside of
Okay.
the things we grew up in.
Sure,
So
that makes
anyway,
sense. Yeah.
and everyone's experience is different, but this is just I don't know, it's been helping me kind of unpack some of these things of like purity culture and how was purity culture like a manipulative behavior to get kids to act and be a certain
Mm.
way, which was
Mhm.
really I don't blame people for being like, I don't want my kid to have sex. I don't want my kid to get
Yeah.
pregnant in high school. Like I don't blame
Sure.
people for
Yeah.
feeling that way. Um, but when you just replace all of like sex education with like don't have sex,
Yeah.
there can be some problems with that down the
Yeah.
line. So
Well, it's strange because my mom, like, there was a bit of a dichotomy with her. So, like, she was actually pretty open about, like, sex education and stuff like that. I grew up in Southern Oregon, and it's fairly liberal. Um,
mhm,
and so it was, like, a weird like, I don't know, that's I in our current state, I always tell people, like, I think if you go far enough left and far enough right, they kind of come back and they meet, right? And I think
yes.
my childhood like encompasses that. So like my mom was very liberal. Like we learned all about sex and sex education when I was young. My brothers and I were all born at home, for example. So like I was there for my brother's birth. Um, I guess we would have been more like hippies, I guess, a little bit along that
Mhm,
side of things. But then yeah, and then I got a purity ring. So it's just like this weird like
right.
it was so confusing as a kid. I'll be honest, it was very confusing. Um, very confusing. Yeah, I had like a book like Our Bodies Ourselves. I don't know if you've read that book, but like so
I've heard of
like
it before.
yeah, so it was like and my friends and their parents were very liberal and yeah, so it's just this weird very weird dichotomy that my mom was trying to I feel like hold both sides at the same time and it was like how are you doing this? It didn't
Yeah.
manifest very well. It made me super confused. Yeah.
Yeah. No, I think that's the thing. I work with these ladies and they're wonderful ladies and they're currently writing a book that's kind of hopefully going to be the way they pitched it to me was they were like it's like the playbook for like what you kind of like wish your parents had known and what they would have
Okay.
said
Yeah.
kind of a
I
thing.
love
And
it.
their whole show and the reason I work with them, their podcast is they interview 20-year-olds primarily about like their experience with sex and relationships and all these things, and they're trained therapists and a sex expert. And so it's interesting to hear them be able to talk to these young people about just like and ask them like, well, what do you wish you would have known, right? Like,
Yeah.
what do you wish mom and dad would have said or done, and things like that. And so hopefully, I think that's going to be really helpful for a lot of people because I think parents,
Yeah.
to your point, I think parents they kind of like they have some idea of like, oh, I want to educate my kid in this, but maybe sometimes they don't know how or they don't know like
Mhm.
the proper ways to communicate it. And so, yeah, you end up with these weird, funky feelings, and
Yeah.
sometimes things circle back around. You
Yeah.
just end up with these weird points, and then now as adults, we sit there and we go, "What the heck were you thinking?"
Yeah.
Like what were you doing? Um, but then again, the next generation will look back at us and be like, "What
Yeah,
were they
what were you
thinking?"
doing?
It will just continue on for all of time, but hopefully it just gets progressively better over time.
I hope so.
Uh, we can hope.
That's funny.
So I do want to talk about too, not to totally go off the rails, but like
Yeah.
when when you did kind of like leave homeschooling and whether it was high school or college, but like
Yeah.
catching up on like pop culture and like getting like were you some homeschooling has the myth or the title of also being like the sheltered environment, right, where it's like, oh yeah, we don't do that, we don't watch that. You already brought
Yeah.
up Christina Aguilera, Britney Spears, but like you know was was there a learning curve when you kind of exited that to be like, okay, I gotta play catch up a little bit with
Yeah.
everybody else because I missed these cultural moments?
For sure. Well, so we didn't have a TV as a kid, it was banned in our house. We would watch, like, movies sometimes, but they had to be, like, pre-approved movies. The weird thing was, though, that we did get a computer, so I was one of the first households that I knew of that had a computer, And so again, there's this like strange dichotomy, right? So like no TV, but computer. And so my brother's actually in tech, both of them are in tech. And I think part of the reason was because we had a computer kind of before a lot of other families did. And so, yeah, we spent a lot of time playing games on the computer, getting on the internet, doing stuff probably in some cases that we shouldn't have been doing. Um, so it was a strange, like, so in terms of like movies and TV and stuff, I was totally not up on anything when I got back to school. Um, Music, I think I got exposed to a lot through my peers. As a kid, it was a lot of classical music, and then my parents' music that they listened to. Um, so I remember like the first time I heard the Beastie Boys, I was like, "What is this?" Right? And so then I
Yeah.
started like, I would like sadly I would sneak music, right? So it was like one of my big sneaking things, which is I'm not saying it's a great thing, but one of my big sneaking things was listening to like bad music, quote unquote. So BC Boys, Sublime. I think the first album I bought was Lauryn Hill, Miseducation of Lauryn Hill. So just like, and then trading music back and forth with my friends, like, because that was back in
Yeah.
the day when we could do like mixtapes and CDs and things like that.
Right.
So a lot of
Yeah.
mixtapes.
Yeah.
So that was
I was
my bad thing was listening to music. I would like go outside and like put on my Walkman and listen to music.
I love that so much. That's amazing. I feel like my parents definitely they sheltered and didn't shelter me in the music arena. I mean, I played guitar, so and I wanted to play like I we had these people in our lives who were kind of like my adopted grandparents. They were just like they were the grandparents who lived closer than the actual grandparents lived, basically. Is
Yeah.
how it felt. Um, and so, but uh, Tom, he showed me like Eric Clapton for the first time one time when I was over, and
Oh,
I just fell
okay.
in love with it. And so I
Yeah,
was like,
yeah,
okay, now most people, Eric Clapton, not that bad, right? I mean,
yeah,
it's classic rock. Um, maybe it is bad. But but
yeah,
it sparked this like interest in me to kind of pursue that. And I had a music teacher who was really pushing me to be like, okay, you like listen to anything and everything because like you will hear influences in anything and everything you listen to, and it can impact you as a musician, right? And so thankfully I had parents who were like a little bit more lenient where I was like, okay, I remember buying John Mayer
yeah.
Room for Squares and being like, oh my gosh, and then like getting every John Mayer album after that,
Okay.
you know. But there was definitely also this like, you know, Lady Gaga is kind of on the fringe of like maybe she's more of a bad artist, and like,
Yeah.
Pitbull is like a little bit
Yeah,
more
yeah,
like bad, and stuff like that. So it was like that guilty pleasure music that I would listen to quietly, but
yeah,
I wasn't blasting it out loud. Um, Now I don't care. Now I'm like, this is what
yeah.
I listen to, mom and dad.
Right, yeah,
Um,
exactly.
but yeah, but it took a minute to like I don't know, like, when I got to college, I think is where I really, like, I flipped the script of, like, I was like, "I'm gonna listen to anything and everything,"
Yeah,
and Spotify was, like, really fresh at that point too, and Pandora was massive, so it was, like it was a lot, I think, easier also to just, like, access music in any
yeah,
genre you wanted to and find additional stuff. But it's funny you brought up mixtapes. I do remember when I was a kid swapping CDs with my friends. Most of the times it was just like
yeah.
Christian music back and forth. But when we were in high school, we did for a while. We all bought MP3 players and we would load stuff onto
Oh,
them, and then we
okay.
would just swap MP3 players. That
Oh,
was
that's
like our
cool.
way of
Yeah,
changing uh mixtapes.
that's awesome.
So yeah. But that's interesting. It's funny because it's crazy too because you know you're more of a product of the 90s. I'm a product of the
Mhm.
2000s primarily, and so it's
Yeah,
interesting that even within that, it's a decade of time, but like there's still just a lot of the similarities in there of like,
yeah,
well, this is what parents were doing, and this is what was like good and not good, and um, I know I put a note down because when we chatted last time, you brought up like Adventures in Odyssey, which was like
oh,
audio
right.
drama, and how that was
Yeah, I
like
forgot
really
about
big in your
that.
house. Same for me. It was like a
Yeah,
massive thing in my house, and that and Veggie Tales. It was like that's the clean stuff. That's the stuff the kids
yeah,
can listen to at any
yep.
time. you know.
Yeah, that actually
Um,
I forgot about that. We listened to Adventures in Odyssey, like, all the time because we didn't have TV access. Yeah. I
yeah,
guess my mom would
yeah,
let us watch PBS, but that was, like, the one channel. Yeah,
yeah,
PBS and
yeah.
then Adventures in Odyssey.
very similar. I didn't have cable for the longest time. We had, like, a DVD player to VHS, and, yeah, it
Yeah.
was, you know, um, yeah. So, I feel ya. I feel ya on a lot of these things because it's like, I and it was just normal. I think I
Yeah.
look back on it and I go, "Well, that was just normal," and then I meet new people and they're like, "Oh, I grew up watching cable," and I'm like, "What
Yeah.
is that?"
Right, exactly. Yeah, and I do feel
So,
like there was, like, gaps when I went back to high school. I did feel like sort of I think you asked me this before, but, like, I felt kind of disconnected in a way because there were, like, large chunks of things that I just didn't know about. And then I did the same
yeah,
thing you did once I got to college, as I went bonkers with music. You know, downloaded Napster, which I
yeah,
know was illegal, but yeah, we were all doing it at the time, right? So I had Napster and I was downloading, as much music as
yeah,
I could. I was like part of some CD club where I was, buying dollar CDs. So I got really into just learning as much as I could about, well, music primarily because that was my thing.
right.
Um, I still have huge gaps in movies. So people will be like, "Did you watch blah 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 movie?" And I'm like, "Nope." Like from
Yep,
the
have no idea what you're talking
80s
about.
80s through like 2000, pretty much no. I'll try
Yeah,
to go back and watch
yeah,
some stuff now, but it's like, it's not as cool as it was, I guess.
yeah. It doesn't hit the same. It's not gonna have the same nostalgia.
Not
Yeah,
really.
I
Yeah.
I feel yeah. There's
Yeah.
those few movies for me too where I'm just like, I missed it. I missed the cultural moment. We're
Yeah.
past it now. You know,
Yeah.
it
It's
is what
like
it is.
yeah. And then of course I went to college and then I think I don't know if I mentioned this to you before, but I joined the Peace Corps after that. So I have and during the Peace Corps I was also like completely disconnected from or like electricity. So
Yeah,
I didn't have any like access to anything. So essentially for me, like if you ask me, there's like a small chunk of time between like 2000 and 2004, but like from up to like 2007, 8, I'm just like a cultural bloop. So
wow.
people are like, "Did you watch that movie?" And I'm like, "Nope."
Yep.
Don't remember
Nope, missed
that.
that one. Yeah.
Yeah.
So I'm interested to know too, like the transition from like you mentioned earlier that like well, a lot of kids were maybe growing up with like their core friend group. You didn't really have that core friend group
Yeah.
partly because you were just ping ponging back and forth between homeschool and public school and a few months here
Yeah.
and a few months there and all this different thing. Was there ever a point or was it difficult then when you kind of were like, okay, now I'm in a more stable place of like, okay, I'm in high school consistently, like in public school. Now I'm in college where you were like, okay,
Mhm.
now I can build friendships finally, or had that kind of hurt your socialization skills so bad that it was like just really difficult.
So I think I did make friends in high school. But I was part of like I would say, I wasn't part of the cool group by any means. I was, sort of with the artsy kids, I guess, which was fine. It was fine to be part of that group. I don't like, it was a fine group of friends. But I
Yeah.
don't feel like I only have like maybe two people from my childhood that I'm still like regularly in contact with. And then in college, I went far away, so I didn't have any friends that like transitioned with me from high school to college. And I did
Right.
build friends or friendships, but I think I do have a hard time like maintaining friendships, and I don't know if that's partially a reflection of homeschool. I'm not sure. Um, could just be also childhood stuff. Who knows?
Yeah.
But yeah, I do have a harder time, like I would say, maintaining friendships than I have a lot of people that I know, but not necessarily a lot of like close friendships.
I feel that. I think I also moved far away for school and like the first real like friend I made in college was honestly because we were waiting in line at some party to get like a root beer float and I was day 2 of being at school. I know nobody. I was like, at some point I just have to start like introducing
Yeah.
myself to people, and I said, okay,
Right.
whoever's behind me right now, I'm just going to turn around and say hello. And I did it, and we became
Awesome.
good friends in college. And that friendship hasn't, I wouldn't say we're not friends, but it's definitely drifted a little bit. So I also
Yeah.
relate to you on that kind of like the maintaining friendships is very hard. And I think that's also just it's hard to have adult friends. I think that's
Yeah,
just a
I agree.
reality
I
for
agree.
a lot of people.
Yeah.
Um and
I will
so
say though, like in comparison, so my brothers have had more lifelong friends than I have. Like people that they both of them, for
mhm,
example, married people from high school. And so they have like friends that they've known since the time they were pretty little that they're still friends with and they hang out with on a regular basis, even as adults.
Yeah.
So I do think that like not having elementary school friendships did do some amount of damage, I guess, to my like ability to make like lifelong friends. I do feel that way.
So in those early years, like of homeschool, where it was, yeah, you're at home most of the time. You have you brought up you had some kind of like outside classes with other kids potentially that were more experiential, but like,
Mhm.
was it primarily just like we're at home, kind of cut off from the world, or was there opportunities to have friends?
So there were and there weren't. Like, so my mom was a friendly person. So we did have like friends that she made that would be like family friends that we'd all hang out with together. Um, and then I
Yeah.
had like a couple of like one-off friends that I made through, classes or things that you know, things that we were doing. But weirdly, like a lot of the experiential stuff wasn't with other homeschool kids. I think there's more of that now than there was when I was young, but like we didn't have
Hmm.
like a core group of homeschool people that we hung out with. And
Right.
so there wasn't like this continual, like, oh, this is our group that we get together and do things with. My mom did tutor kids like periodically in our home. So we'd have like an extra kid for a while that she would have homeschooling with us, which was kind of weird as well. Um,
Yeah.
so that was, yeah. So I don't know. I feel like there could have been ways that we could have done better with the socialization part if she tried harder. But I think, she had her own stuff going on and her own like issues
You're
from her
right.
childhood that she was dealing with. And I think that like reflected in our upbringing and maybe
Yeah.
like, I don't think like her making the choice to homeschool maybe was necessarily in our best interest. It was more something that she felt like she wanted to do. And so I kind
Yeah.
of think about that a lot when I'm like, why are people homeschooling? Are they homeschooling because of themselves or because they truly think that it's better for their kids? So in my mom's case, I
Yeah.
think it was stemming more from her, not from us, if that makes sense.
No, that does make sense. Well, I think it's interesting because, like you said, you have two brothers. They're both younger. So one sounds like he's about 3 years younger, and then a 7 year age
Yeah.
gap. And so their experiences are just vastly different. Where it's like you had a good 8-ish years of your life where it's like I was homeschooled, and then the next
Hmm.
brother it's only 5, and the next brother it's not even that. And
Right.
so their experiences, I'm sure, are just vastly different.
Vastly. Yeah.
Because of the fact that it's just like you didn't ride the wave the whole time I rode the wave, so to
Right. Yeah.
speak.
Exactly.
Um, you know, and so for you, and that's sometimes the struggle of being the oldest kid, right? Is like at
Yeah.
the end of the day, we
I'm
usually
the
get
guinea pig
we get
kid.
the
Yeah.
yeah, exactly. Um, yeah, I feel that so much sometimes with my mom,
That's funny.
but yeah, so I think that's interesting because I'm sure that's now shaped because you're a parent now, and that's shaped maybe how you've chosen to like raise your kids and like um homeschool, not homeschool. Like um,
Yeah.
you shared with me before you're not homeschooling your kids, but like, you know, did some of that has your past, I guess, kind of influenced maybe how you think about it today?
Yeah, definitely. I made a choice not to homeschool purposefully. Um I Not to say that any parent can't homeschool, but even me, like and I have a PhD and I don't feel qualified to homeschool my children. And the reason is because like I don't have early childhood education training at all. I don't, and it's really hard to be a parent. Not gonna lie, like you're kind of like thrown into this thing that you don't really know that much about, right? And you're like, here go, like, like there's no
Yeah.
classes. I mean, some people take classes and read books, but a lot of people don't, right? And so it's just kind of like you
Yeah.
go off of what your parents did and you hope for the best, right? Um,
Right.
and not to say that I think public school is always like the best place for every child, but the things that I really like about it for my kids are that there are opportunities that I can't provide for them, like things that I don't know about or things that I, you know, can't get them in a normal setting. Like my son loves sports, and I didn't
Right.
really get to do sports as a kid. There were, city leagues and stuff, but that's his thing. He loves it. It's his
Mhm.
dream to be, and he's really good at it. And as a result of being in school, he's been able to pursue, whatever sport he wanted to do, which is something that I would have had a hard time providing for him. And then
Yeah.
my daughter is more artsy, and so she really loves like all sort of arts. So I will say that's one of the things that I feel like, public school's gone away from a bit is offering the arts as much. Um,
Yeah.
but I was able to get them into a school that has choir and music and art classes, and she's done really well. Um, and then like both of them have very good friends that they have known for a very long time and teachers that they've really connected to. And I think that, some people get afraid of their kids connecting to other adults, but I frankly think it's a good thing to have good adult connections that are outside of your family. That's something that I really value. Like some of the best mentors I've ever had in my life have been teachers, right? People
Yeah.
that taught me that were not my parents, not my relatives. Um, that inspired me in some way. Like the reason I joined the Peace Corps was I had a middle school teacher in seventh grade that joined the Peace Corps, and she talked about it all the time. And it was life
Yeah.
changing for her, and it stuck in my head. And right. And so, like, I really strongly believe that, like, that whole village mentality, it takes a village to raise a child. I really, really believe in that. And I think that having a village of good people in your kids' lives can be really, really valuable to them in a way that's hard to recreate, like with just a parent or two parents.
I tell people I think my homeschool experience was is kind of different because I had a lot of that. I feel like I was part of big homeschool communities, homeschool
Hmm.
classes. I had outside teachers and influences in my life. And so
Yeah.
I have those people like you're talking about and that you want to provide for your kids. And so I think the difference it made a difference, I think.
Hmm.
And it didn't I think always feel like, "Oh, well, I'm a homeschool kid." It felt much more just sometimes like I have some of those same influences. I talked to my friends who
Yeah.
went to public school and they're like, "Oh, I was really close with this guidance counselor or this professor or whatever." And it's like, "Oh, well, I had that too." Like I was really
Yeah.
close with my music teacher.
Yeah.
And things like that. And so it's like those interactions and like you said, I think being able to as a kid have those is especially being able to like talk with adults and
Hmm.
um hold conversation and learn from adults is really important. And as a parent, it's like I'm not a parent, so I mean, but this is an outside perspective, but I see the most benefit from the parents who regardless of where their kid goes to school, how they
Hmm.
educate, they are just involved in their kid's life and
Yeah,
just
for
want to
sure.
know and they want the
For
best for
sure.
their kid and they push for whatever that is. So, you know, that I think goes so much further than like homeschool, don't homeschool. It's like,
Hmm.
well, you can really screw up either one of those.
True.
It's more about you being a good parent or not at the end of the day is the way
Yeah.
that's how I feel personally.
Yeah.
Um, but yeah, so I applaud you, because I mean, there's also just like a billion and one voices out here that tell you like this is the right way to do this and this is the right way to do that, and it's
I
like
know.
no, there's
It's
just
yeah.
I don't think that there's one right way for a lot of it. Um, yeah, so this has been incredible. I want to say thank you first of all for coming on and being so vulnerable,
Yeah, thank
and
you.
sharing your homeschool experience. Is there look kind of looking back at your homeschool experience, I'm gonna ask you 2 things. Is
Okay.
there a moment that stands out as you go, "Okay, this is, like, in my opinion, the biggest negative of homeschooling,
Okay.
and then maybe this is the biggest positive of homeschooling?"
Um, so I think it kind of relates to what you were saying, but um, for me, the biggest negative was that my mom probably wasn't, and my parents weren't in a place to be the healthiest parents. And so for me, the biggest negative was that homeschool, I was like trapped with this
Yeah,
not great situation. And because I didn't have a good network of other people to talk to, or even like another reality of like, oh, other families aren't like this. It was like took me a long time to like work myself through that as an adult and like that what I went through. So for me, I think that's the biggest negative, is that if you have a family dynamic where things are not healthy, toxic, whatever, abusive, I guess, that being in homeschool can trap you there in a way that I feel like, yes, people do get trapped, if they go to public school, but there's teachers and other people that are looking out for kids. So for me, that was certainly the biggest negative overall. Um, but the biggest positive, I think, that was that I became like a more self-directed learner. I think I kind of touched on that earlier. And
Yeah.
I've become somebody that, like, you throw me into a situation and I can just kind of figure it out. Like, I don't need
Yeah.
necessarily guidance to be like, this is the steps, right? I like, okay, do this thing, figure it out. And I can
Yeah.
most of the time, right? And
Yeah.
so that is the positive for me, 100%. That, and it's influenced what I
Yeah.
chose as my profession, essentially.
Yeah.
Yeah.
The best compliment I ever got from someone was they're like, "You are like a human Swiss Army knife," and I was like, "Okay." And they're like, "We have thrown you into this situation, we throw you into that, and you just like picked it up and did whatever." And I was like, "Huh, that's interesting." And yeah, as I've spent time unpacking that, it to your point, it's like I think being at home and having an education where yeah, you are kind of that person who has to you have to want it and you have to
Mhm.
like pursue it. And I think it's a love of education at the root of it, which is like something that my parents instilled in me. It sounds like your parents kind of instilled in you, or
Yeah.
at least put you in a position where you're like, I have
I
to
have to
be
figure
into
this out.
learning.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I think when you have that, it's like you said, it's easy to just kind of get thrown into any situation and be like, okay,
Mhm.
I can pick this up. I know the questions to ask. I know
Yep.
the logistics of like how to find the information that I need, and then we can
Mhm.
roll. And most of the time, that's half the battle right there.
It's true.
It's just that.
I agree. I
So,
agree.
oh my gosh, Whitney, this has been amazing. Is there anything I left out or that I haven't asked you that I should have asked you, or any other homeschool memories that have just like popped up where you're like, oh, this was funny or cringy or just like I don't know anything that I've forgotten before we
Um,
say goodbye?
Nothing in particular that I can think of, but, yeah, yeah, thank you for having me on. It's been really great to kind of delve more into your channel and stuff, so thank you.
Yeah, no, I'm so glad you found me, and I know when we chatted last, you were talking about everybody I've talked with who has kind of come from outside of like my friend group that I grew up
Yeah.
with. It's interesting how they like either hear about the show or that asking them about exploring the ex-homeschooler realm of just them being like, oh, I found Reddit posts and I found Quora and whatever else, like asking questions to find that community. And so
Yeah.
it's been cool. It's been cool to kind of like be a part of that and learning, and even me, I'm seeking out that more
Yeah.
and trying to find more people outside of the the few hundred that I grew up kind of surrounded by. um and because there's a lot of us out there's a lot of us
There
homeschool
are.
weirdos out there,
Yeah.
and we got some crazy stories,
I
and
agree.
some crazy unique experiences. And so yeah, so once again, thank you for sharing your story. I appreciate it so much.
Thank you, Jacob.
And to all my listeners, if you want to reach out, if you want to be on the show, it's super easy. Just shoot me an email at exhsclub@gmail.com. Whitney did it. You can do it. We chat. We have a good time. We goof around. And we talk about our ex homeschool days. So until next time, I'll see ya. All right. Peace.